morning. We are going to talk on Gandhi and Hindu-Muslim amity. It's well known that Gandhi has almost sacrificed his life for bringing the two communities together, so that his dream of, as well as the dream of most of the leaders of the nationalist movement, will come true. This dream was about the formation of a nation, an India, which will be the home for all the communities and castes and people belonging to different languages and regions. So it was an integrative dream, inclusive dream, in which there will be no differences on the basis of religion, caste, region or language. So it was that dream which Gandhi lived for and for which he struggled. So in this context, we are going to discuss his views and his activities on this issue of bringing the two biggest communities in India, Hindus and Muslims, together. The three things which Gandhi always insisted upon during the entire course of his movement, beginning with the non-cooperation movement, was charkha, that is the spinning wheel, Hindu-Muslim unity, and the third thing was the removal of untouchability from Indian society. So these three things he had insisted upon right from the beginning. In fact, except for charkha, which came to him a little later, the two other themes had been with him even during his stay in South Africa, when he tried to bring all the Indians together, irrespective of caste and community, on one platform. So this has been his ongoing view and ongoing activity. When he arrived in India, he saw that there were many stirrings going on, particularly during the war times. Stirring in the Indian society was going on, and people were feeling agitated about the colonial character of our existence. He wanted that people should be united and a movement should be launched in order to remove the imperialist government from India. For this he started the anti-Rowlatt Satyagraha. Rowlatt Act was passed in order to bring the Indians who were agitating under a strict law where there will be no court, they cannot go to the court and they would be punished without that. So Gandhi started a movement. Around the same time, at the end of the war, another movement of the Muslims, primarily of the Muslims, was going on. It was called the Khilafat movement. So Gandhi took up the cause of Khilafat movement, and Khilafat movement was intended for the restoration of Khalifa in Turkey. So although it was in a way, this Khilafat movement was in a way oriented towards outside. Nevertheless, the Muslims and others who participated in the Khilafat movement, they also wanted an anti-British current to exist among the Indians. So Gandhi realized that, and he supported the Khilafat movement. Not only he supported the Khilafat movement, he joined it together with his own movement, which was the biggest movement so far, and it was called the non-cooperation movement. So by joining together the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement, what he tried to do was to bring the Muslims into the mainstream of Indian politics. Muslims as a community into the mainstream of Indian politics. It is true that Muslims had been participating in the Indian nationalist movement right since the beginning, but that was only as individuals. Khilafat movement was a community-based movement. So by joining, and he became the leader of he was made the leader of the supreme leader of the Khilafat movement as well by the Khilafat leaders. So by joining together in his own personality the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement, Gandhi tried at this stage very strongly to bring together the two communities in a common movement, common anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-British movement. So this was an important step in the direction of creating a unity between these two largest communities in India. Now, what he thought? He thought that these together, bringing the Hindus and Muslims together and making a united India, will be not only in interest of the country, but it will also be in the interest of the world as such. How was it? It was because India and the Indians in terms of number consisted a large part of globe, and they were almost 1/5 of the humanity, overall humanity. So if the Indians existed in peace with each other, there are no internal tension and there is no violence and a kind of communal amity and a united nation of India. So it will be helpful for the world, because then India can also, through its philosophy of non-violence, can preach to the world how to exist peacefully, how to exist together without any strife, without any struggle. So that was his aim, and that's why he said that it was important that the Indians be united so that they can play a major role in the world. So this ideology of brotherhood, non-violence and peace, which Gandhi thought India had been preaching right since the beginning, would be helpful for the world as whole. So he tried very hard through Khilafat movement and other issues to bring all the Indians together, and through non-cooperation movement to bring the Indians together on one platform, which was the anti-imperialist platform, anti-colonial platform in India. Gandhi believed that India as a civilization had been a syncretic civilization. What does syncretism mean? Syncretism means that you can have your own values, your own faiths, your own religions, your own beliefs, and yet you can mix with others not only as individually, but also beliefs can mix with each other, daily chores can be shared, and various symbols of country can also be shared symbols. So this is what syncretism in daily life as well as syncretism in thought meant for him. So for him, it was possible for multiple groups, multiple communities to exist together and still share a lot of common ground with each other. He contrasted India in that sense, India as a civilization, he contrasted it with Europe, where nations had come into being on the basis of single language and a single ethnicity. In Europe, for example, the Germans claimed that they had belonged to a single ethnic group and they had a single language, that they had a right to form a nation. Italians thought similarly, and so on. French thought in the same way, the Russians thought in the same way, the Polish thought in. So you find that in Europe, the nations came into being on the basis of a supposed single ethnicity and definitely a single language. One language was considered as supreme, as the language of the nation. So in France it was the French, in Germany it was German, in Italy it was the Italian. So all these languages are singular so far as their respective nations are concerned. India as a civilization, Gandhi believed, went beyond these narrow limits of ethnicity and language. Here is a civilization throughout its history, right since the beginning of the Ashokan Empire, that multiple ethnicities and multiple languages existed together in one common bond. So that is the dream which Gandhi had for India as a multi-ethnic, multilinguistic nation in which people belonging to various communities and castes could coexist without any violence, without any acrimony. So that was the important thing in his mind. So he considered a nation not only a kind of exclusive zone for a single ethnic group or a single linguistic group, but a kind of zone, cultural zone, in which people of various cultures, various ethnicities can mix together and try to develop a syncretic culture and syncretic civilization in which peace can be there. Non-violence, as you know, was one of his major principles. Without non-violence, without peace, he did not conceive the existence of humanity, because he thought humanity can exist only when there is a non-violence and peace, and people can coexist together. Now, Gandhi tried his best, and yet we find that in the 1920s, after the decline of the non-cooperation movement, after the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, we find that there were a lot of communal riots between Hindus and the Muslims. Now, what was in the root of such a division between these two communities, and when did it start? Now we find that the rift between Hindus and Muslims, particularly among the elites, but also it went down to the masses to some extent, began in the late 19th century. Late 19th century, as you know, was also a colonial period, and the colonial regime, as it tried to entrench itself within the country and gain a kind of administrative hold over its people, also tried a policy of divide and rule. The colonial rulers thought that if through their policies and programs and their speeches and other things, if they can prevent these two large communities, Hindus and Muslims, to come together, their rule will succeed in India for a long time. This they realized because during the revolt of 1857, they found that both the Hindus and Muslims fought against the colonial regime together and also won in various regions. In Uttar Pradesh, then it was United Provinces and Bihar and many other regions of North India, as well as many regions in East and South India as well, to some extent, but mostly in North India, they found that because of the coming together of Hindus and Muslims, British rule was almost eliminated from this region. It was a very difficult time for the Britishers in India, and they realized that unless these two communities are stopped from coming together, there will be no colonial rule in India. So soon after the revolt ended, they started bringing in the policies to keep the two communities separate from each other. And these were reflected in the policies and programs of the leaders of these communities also. And the three things which came up during the late 19th century, which the leaders of these two respective communities started, was the issue of one, cow protection, second was music before mosque, and third was Hindi-Urdu controversy. So cow protection was a movement started by Hindu leaders as Muslims were beef eaters, and they were meat eaters, but they also ate beef. It was, and cow is a revered animal, is worshipped among the Hindus. So Hindus started a movement trying to stop the Muslims from killing the cows. Now, these movement in certain areas turned violent, in which lives were lost, there were riots, and in some regions there were massive riots, for example in Bihar, in Bombay, and in some other places. There were massive riots in which thousands of people died. And cow protection movement, particularly in the late 19th century and first decade of the 20th century, in fact first 2 decades of the 20th century, became a very important, very strong movement. So it was this thing which Gandhi also saw. So when he started his movement, he started to bring the two communities together. He requested the Muslims to voluntarily stop killing the cows so that Hindu-Muslim amity can be achieved. So this was one of his policies. Another thing which was a bone of contention between these two communities in the late 19th century was music before the mosque. As you know, Islam prohibits loud music, particularly when the prayer is going on. So this was one complaint of the Muslims, leading to many riots, that the Hindus played music when they were praying in their mosque or other places. So this was another bone of contention. Gandhi tried to resolve this issue by requesting the Hindus to listen to the Muslims on this issue and not play music while passing before the mosque, particularly when the prayer is going on. So he requested the Hindus to stop, particularly when they were taking a procession in front of the mosque, not to play music. So this is how he tried to resolve this issue. The third thing was Hindi-Urdu controversy. This also arose in the late 19th century when these two languages were separated from each other. Separated from each other because historically, since the 13th century, these two languages have been part of a single language which was called Hindavi, and which existed for many centuries. This Hindavi language was then, during the 19th century, was split, and the Urdu was taken away from it, and the Hindi was also taken away from it, and both became two different languages with Urdu now embellished with Persian terms, while Hindi being embellished with Sanskrit terms. So although their grammar remained the same, their syntax remained the same, their vocabulary started going away from each other, and this created a lot of controversy. Another thing was the script. Urdu started to be written in Persian script, Arabic Persian script, and while Hindi was being started in Devanagari script. So the controversy about the two languages became a language about the script and language about the vocabulary mostly, but it became a very bitter controversy, and it led to a lot of acrimony between these two communities. Gandhi tried to bridge this gulf by pointing out that it's possible to evolve a new language which may be called Hindustani by taking common words from both the languages and also by adopting the words from folk languages, words from more popular vernaculars. So, this he tried to evolve and tried to put down this controversy on this point. Then there was another problem about the representation in legislature. Representation in legislature, at least since 1909, started on the communal basis. So, although the Hindus and for the others there was a common constituency, for Muslims there were separate electorates, separate constituency in which only Muslims can vote for Muslim candidates. So, this created a kind of division between the two communities, although not much, because the franchise was very limited. It was so limited that the only elite participated in that. Nevertheless, it gave rise to a kind of division between the two communities, at least at the upper level. Gandhi was against separate electorate, but since decisions were already taken before he came on the scene, and this decision was ratified by both the Congress and the Muslim League in the Lucknow Pact. So, Gandhi could not do much about that and he had to accept this thing. Nevertheless, he was against the idea of separate electorates and he tried to stop it, particularly when in the early 1930s, in 1932, the British government tried to create another division in Indian society by creating a separate electorates for the depressed classes. This Gandhi fought hard. He went on an indefinite fast and then he brought about a kind of rapprochement, a kind of conciliation between the leaders of the depressed classes and the general Congress and other Hindu leaders. And this resulted in the reservation of seats in common electorates, and that is the trend which continued even later. So, we find that Gandhi tried very hard to keep the country together, to keep the nation together, to fight the British attempt to divide the nation into communities and caste and at various levels. Yet, despite his efforts and despite the efforts of many other leaders, Gandhi could not do a lot to stop the communal division. Although he was able to bridge the gulf between languages, between regions, between castes to a large extent, so that the India which emerged in 1947 had these problems, they had incorporated these things in their constitution, in the Indian constitution, in which many languages were recognized as national languages, in which reservation were given for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and deprived groups. So, all these things were incorporated. Nevertheless, the communal division Gandhi could not stop, and it was one of his failures. This happened for various reasons. The reasons were manifold, but there are some reasons which we are going to bring to you at this stage, which will be helpful to understand what he did and why he failed. First, we start in the 1920s itself. After the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, the Muslim leaders, particularly the elite Muslim leaders, they felt that since in Turkey the regime of the Khalifa, all the lands of the Khalifa was not given back to him by the British, they felt that their movement was still continuing while Gandhi had withdrawn the non-cooperation movement. So, they felt betrayed and very bitter about this thing. and this led to many riots in various regions between Hindus and Muslims. Gandhi realized this problem of communal division, and he went on a long fast of 21 days in 1924 to atone for the sins which these two communities had caused by killing each other and by injuring each other. Nevertheless, the communal differences continued, and although in the non-cooperation movement there was a lot of participation by the Muslims, in the next movement, the civil disobedience movement started in 1930, Muslims did not participate in large numbers, and when 1942 movement, the Quit India movement was started, Muslims in fact not only kept away from it, but Muslim leaders, particularly in the form of Muslim League, they were opposed to the movement and they called it anti-Muslim. So we find that the communal division were growing, they were not coming back. This was caused also by the policies of the colonial regime, which through various policies, by keeping separate electorates, by other policies of recognizing the Muslim League when it was confined only to a few persons, then giving more weightage to Muslims in the provinces, and so on. There were n number of policies that Muslim leaders were promoted during this period by the colonial regime in order to put down the Indian National Congress and the nationalist movement which was going on. This created wider and wider chasm between the two communities, and finally which led to the partition of the country, and not only the partition of the country but also killings and migration at an unimaginable scale during the partition from in both North India and East India. Particularly in North India, even after partition, there was a lot of killings and migration and other atrocities against people of these two communities. So we find that this was a kind of failure for Gandhi and for the nationalist movement, despite their effort, the lot of effort they had put in for accommodation, for conciliation, and also for active incorporation of the people of both communities within the movement. Nevertheless, this is one theme which will be explored further so far as the question of causes are concerned. We will stop here, and thank you very much.